It's 4:01 and the sun is about to set over Gloucester, and I'm happy to see everyone here. Last year, we celebrated on this day and read all of the Maximus poems one evening. It took us 10 hours, and not everybody lasted that long. We thought we'd do a meeting, a Zoom hookup, and read some of Olson's work and other people's work who are that Olson is dear to. So I wanted to just introduce the library director, Andre Spears, who's, I can almost touch him. He's right there. Andre.
Sure. It's nice to see you all. I guess you all know about the Maud Olson Library. Ralph Maud got this really strange idea at some point to start collecting a facsimile version of Olson's library and copy all his annotations, and so that all the books in Olson's library, as Gregor says, his mind could be available to anyone in sort of one sitting. There is a real issue as to what's going to happen to this library. The rent is up October of this year. I mean, the plan was really to house it in Vancouver at Simon Fraser, and then, long story short, it ended up in Gloucester, where I think it belongs, obviously. I don't know, however, if it's sustainable. So I just passed that on. The whole idea is whether there is a polis there, whether something will, rise, so to speak, to meet the challenge.
Yeah, we hope that it'll meet the challenge as well. We have a lot of things that we're working on. If people don't get the GWC Blast, which delivers news about this library, I hope you can sign up for it. It's at gloucesterwriters.org, and you can just click on contact and you'll get our blast.
The way I think of it, the way I imagine it really is a sort of mirror. I see it as I've said before, as a work of conceptual art. Why hold up a mirror to a person's library? So that's sort of that's what I find intriguing about this, and I very much hope it stays as some sort of monument in Gloucester.
We should dive into the poems.
Okay,
Andre, you want
if
to
you
kick
want
it
to hear a
off?
poem, I was going to read this poem, La Torre. It's one of three poems of the Tower. One of three poems Olson wrote on the Tarot. Actually four, but the three on La Torre, The Green Man, and The Moon is number 18 were all published in his lifetime. There's a fourth poem, The Fool, i.e. The Green Man, which didn't appear till this came out. So voila. The Tower, is a card in the Tarot that shows this lightning striking this tower and people falling, headlong. Might have once been called Hell. It strangely got transformed into La Maison Dieu, the House of God. It might have once stood for Purgatory, but the point is, it didn't start out as La Maison Dieu. It's not. Its picture is rather violent, destruction, and like I said, hell. Okay, La Torre. The tower is broken. The house where the head was used to lift, where all was, and the hands, it is broken. And the sounds are sweet, the air acrid. In the night, fear is fragrant. The end of something has a satisfaction. When the structures go, light comes through. To begin again, lightning is an axe, transfer of force, subject to object is order, destroy. To destroy is to start again, is a factor of sun. Fire is, when the sun is out, doused, to cause the jaws to grind before the nostrils flare, to let breath in stand clear. Here it comes down, and with it the heart has what was. What was, we do lament. Let him who knows not how to pray go to sea. Where there are no walls, there are no laws, forms, sounds, odors to grab hold of. Let the tower fall. Where space is born, man has a beach to ground on. We have taken too little note of this. The sound of a hammer on a nail can be as clear as the blood a knife can make spurt from a round, taut belly. 2. In the laden air, we are no longer cold. Birds spring up, and on the fragrant sea, rafts come toward us, lashed of wreckage and young tree. They bring the quarried stuff we need to try this newfound strength. It will take new stone, new tufa, to finish off this rising tower.
And Andre, thank you. I have something that I wanted to read, and then, which is a poem that my uncle Vincent Farini wrote for Olson soon after his death. It's called The Theomania of Charles Olson. The torch went out, and it's dawning in his night. The pillar that made the matrix gave breath up, becoming the very road itself, talking back, the fountainhead of ecstasy. And above, pathfinders to origins, to the more we are ourselves, the more we give, breaking the darkness through to this juncture. Who'll ever forget that crack in the sky, that heralding sunset of January 10th? The eddies that his fist held slid away, and some are pools of aquavit in the woods of skulls. O earth, receive him, he who has loved thee with such outgoing and such a penetration. Fierce as devotion to principle, as so few treaders of this planet, for reaching out to get that inmost prize you hide. Receive, dear earth, against the despoilers, this quickener of thee and thine, this central human figure and his rhythms of creation, to be alive as he by tasting the ichor of his presence. And I'm sure we'll be tasting more of that ichor as the afternoon progresses.
That's a drawing by Fielding Dawson, who was one of Olson's students. And I was at the Maud Library 2 years ago, maybe spent 3 or 4 days there. And also a few of Fielding's books are there with annotations from Maud that are very interesting in relationship to Fielding claiming Olson as one of his fathers. So Fielding Dawson and I became close friends for the last 10 years of his life just by happenstance. He would come to North Carolina where I live, and we would go into a prison together every year and teach for 2 weeks. And he would stay at our house. So we became very close. And this particular piece is in the permanent collection, the Black Mountain College collection at the Asheville Art Museum. And I was asked to write 3 ekphrastic pieces that on pieces that will appear in their upcoming catalog. And this was one of them. So this is called Fielding's Olson. Franz Klein handed Fee paper, ink, and brush in Franz's studio. Imagine, on the second attempt, from memory, not a glance at the page, eyes closed, intuition parted its sash, and there was Olson, the eyes horned, cavernous, and eyeglasses like manacles, the concentric whirl roiling each socket, Charlie's nose and mustache, intuit elevation, appetite, ideograms, Mayan glyphs on a khaki cardboard field, technically projective, collage verse. Fee saw what his hand had done. Olson rumbles out of his cave.
My selection is a set of 3 texts by Olson, and I'll read from part of one of those. And I chose these because Ralph Maud discovered them, and he wrote a brief introduction to them, which itself is worth reading because it's vintage Ralph Maud. And the other reason I selected them is because these were printed in issue number 55 of the Minutes of the Charles Olson Society in October of 2005, which I'm happy to report can be found at the Maud Olson Library. And what distinguishes these texts for me is not only were they never previously published, but they're an example of Olson taking on the political and topical in his own thick politics way. The brief background to these texts is that they were written specifically and addressed specifically to Ed Sanders for publication in his Fuck You, a Magazine of the Arts. Even so, Olson edited out a reference to Sanders by name in the first text, admonishing himself in the margins of his manuscript. Suddenly sounds like a testimonial. Forget that and look at the matter. Despite being intended for Sanders Magazine, they were never published in it. Since they were written in November and December of 1965, they would have arrived at Sanders' home after Sanders stopped publishing his magazine in June of 1965. Sanders himself doesn't have the originals. In fact, he recently wrote to me asking for a copy of issue number 55 of the Minutes so he could have the texts as published there for his own files. They're very topical texts. In them, Olson condemns lobbying pressure of the political environment, the unadmitted greed of power. He uses the assassination of Malcolm X, who had just been killed that year, as an example of hate in society. He writes of coup d'etat, guerrilla warfare, and has insights into what he calls the Americanization of the world, which will continue for what he predicts will be enormous lengths of time. So that's kind of an overview. The texts are prose. They're a little long, so I really won't read all of them. I'll just read an excerpt from one of them just to give you a flavor. And this is from the second one that he sent to Sanders, and it's called Further Part. That anyone should have to put their fate into the hands of such a leadership, Bundy or Johnson, or intellectually Jack Clemente Valente, or just say back a bit, Vietnam apologist, young Schlesinger, as this nation does now have. Now there shall be government only in the waters of the rivers, and the president shall be the penitent for all the crimes of the people. And the nation in its four directions, northeast, southwest, and in two other directions, one outside the nation and one far below transgression or penitence, in the happiness and the sorrow of those who are still poor enough to have reason to worry about themselves, and young men and young women's determinate observation that today has been made into bullshit. The lines reasonably relevant are, having passed through infinity, the traveler keeps outwards in his wondrous journey on the earth. November 23rd, Olson for Fuck You. So there's still stuff to find out there that has been published by Olson and that you can find in our Maud Olson library. I really like reading Olson, coming across very directly with references to political figures like President Johnson and George Bundy and Arthur Schlesinger he includes as part of the political group. And he's pretty upset in these pieces. It's good to see him expressing his anger.
We have Amiel up next.
Thanks, Henry and Andre, and thank you, John, for that amazing piece. It reminds me of a line by Aimé Césaire, 1956, the same year as Special View of History, where he says, American domination, the only domination from which one never recovers. Something to ponder. I have 3 paragraphs of prose that I realize how important they've been to me for a very, very long time in different ways. The first one is from Apollonius of Tyana. When Apollonius moved off again, he went south-southeast, down the 2 old rivers of the east to Baghdad. We have forgotten what any Arab knows, that Baghdad, for all the long years, the centuries, after the collapse of man's first disciplines, man's first cities, Baghdad remained the intellectual center, the old intellectual center, and much more in touch with the nerve ends of the old path than Alexandria ever was, or than the newest Alexandria, your Manhattan, is today. Any clue to the path which doesn't die, the path which is no more than yourself, if you can find it. And I would note that George W. Bush is going to attend the inauguration, which is a travesty. The second paragraph is from a very important text called This is Yeats Speaking. I think it's one we should really be keeping front and center. The soul is stunned in me, O writers, readers, fighters, fearers, for another reason, that you have allowed this to happen without a trial of your own. This is about the Pound trial. It is the passivity of you young men before Pound's work as a whole, not Scripps alone, you who have taken from him, Joyce, Eliot, and myself, the advances we made for you. There is a court you leave silent, history present, the issue, the larger concerns of authority than a state. Heraclitus and Marx called, perhaps some consideration of descents and metamorphoses, form and the elimination of intellect. We were the forerunners, Pound only the more extreme, but our time was out of phase and made us enders. Lawrence among us alone had the true mask. He lacked the critical intelligence and was prospective. You are the antithetical men, and your time is forward. The conflict is more declared. It is for you to hold the mirror up to authority, behind our respect for which lay a disrespect for democracy as we were acquainted with it. A slogan will not suffice. And the last paragraph is from a little review about a book on Billy the Kid. And this, I can't even tell you how much this has, from the first time I read it, probably as a teenager, how central this passage has been to everything I do and think about. That is, what strikes one about the history of said states, both as it has been converted into story and as there are those who are always looking for it to reappear as art, what has hit me is that it does stay unrelieved and thus loses what it was before it damn well was history, what urgency or laziness or misery it was to those who said and did what they did. Any transposition which doesn't have in it an expenditure at least the equal of what was spent diminishes what was spent. And this is loss in the present, which is the only place where history has context.
Before I read, I just want to say hello to Roby Liscombe. It's been a long time, Roby. There you are, totally across the continent, but it's nice to see you. When I thought about if there was anything I wanted to read, I realized that I think one of the first things I stumbled across in Olson, back around probably a few months after he died. I mean, I didn't realize who he was or anything about him until late 1970, and started reading him and thought, wow, that's a guy I should try to connect with. And then I realized he was dead, but such is life. But the last 4 or 5 lines of his poem, The Librarian, probably changed how I thought about, I don't know about living, but certainly about writing. And he says, I am caught in Gloucester. What's buried behind Lufkin's diner? Who is Frank Moore? It's like that type of questioning in his poetry as Emil said earlier, that the quote that he read from the thing about Billy the Kid has informed his writing. That sort of set kind of a tone for me for what I would like to accomplish, or what I would like to investigate, I guess. These mysteries. What is buried behind Lufkin's Diner? I mean, I live here in Gloucester. I don't know if anyone knows what's buried behind Lufkin's Diner, or maybe there was nothing buried behind Lufkin's Diner, but it was just that question. It was like, I need to find out what's buried behind Lufkin's Diner. I need to know who is Frank Moore. There's a very brief Maximus poem from volume 2. It says 23 School and 16 Columbia, Myrtle and Violets and Wood. 23 Columbia, if I look out my back window, I can see 23 Columbia Street. It's just that kind of being so deep into the local. He was just walking around Gloucester looking at these things and trying to discover, what is it about the Myrtle and Violet? I don't know, but it was important enough to him.
Yeah, I love that that spot on Columbia and School Street. There's a lot of energy there with you and Willie down the street and the Unitarian Church.
Kind of like Fred Buck's footsteps.
And Fred's step, right? Fred's footsteps.
Roby used to live around the corner. Final thing that I'd want to read from the Maximus poem, which also, when I read it, also sort of led me down paths as a writer, I guess. It's from volume 3, sort of toward the end. He writes, wholly absorbed into my own conduits to an inner nature or subterranean lake, the depths or bounds of which I more and more explore and know more of, in that sense that other than that, all else closes out, and I tend further to fall into the beloved lake, and I am blinder from. Spending time as insistently in and on this personal preserve from which what I do emerges more well known than other ways and other outside places which don't give as much and distract me from keeping my attentions as clear. After reading that, I sort of have spent a whole, I don't know, the next 50 something odd years and kind of going down that road.
Hi, I'm calling from Montreal. I was really excited to read, and I chose this one, The Red Fish of Bones, because it struck me as a sort of a fable, and I have a soft spot for those. The Red Fish of Bones. The red fish of bones, the blue fish, and the white fish. The eye of the red fish of bones, the quick soft turning and yearning of the white fish toward the red fish of bones. Tied as she is to the blue fish who comes over so fast to interfere, places himself majestically between the red fish of bones and his lady. But the red fish of bones swings the swing binds the white fish to the majestic. Blue fish of bones, and swinging wide suddenly, the consort, the white fish of bones, is back between the red fish of bones and the blue. And the three swim in the air peacefully again. But for a moment only, the blue fish of the air swims in directly to the eye of the red fish of bones, and the white consort is again off alone, like the moon with Venus. So forever they jockey in their three estates, the red fish of the bones, with his eye for her, the blue fish with her on the same string, and she in the middle, the winsome wife, caught in her turning and maybe her yearning, by the red fish of the bones, whose power over each is not sufficient, against the blue fish of the bones' majesty, to bring the white fish lady over across from the delicate turning of all in the everlasting air of the currents, which turn the red fish of the bones, the white fish, and the blue fish, together in turning and in her yearning, if it is yearning, bound to the blue fish, but looking out from under his majestical turning, as the eye of the red fish turning in his sweep, them both but not reaching, her delicate turning, the white fish of the bones.
All right, well, I was just digging around a little bit, and I was going through my old Maximus 456, and I found a leaf that had slid into the book many, many years ago, back when I was doing my research on my doctorate in the 70s. And I had a sheet there that I guess George Butterick must have passed my way, because we worked together. We were both, studying with Olson at the same time in Buffalo. And this one is called First Stephen's Song, and I can't find it. It's also got a subtitle, The Carpenter. I went looking for that, and I haven't found it. So I thought it would be interesting to read it. There are other poems for this figure, Stevens, who was a shipbuilder in the 17th century. And so this poem was, I thought, to be in among them. Well, I have it tipped into my Maximus Poems where I think it should have been, but it doesn't appear in the later edition. So it's called First Stephen's Song. I'll fix her up and sail her out to sea. The smell of the land went out 50 miles to greet them. The flake racks of the city perfumed the streets. The hills from Lower Middle and from Pleasant Street were covered with gardens, and before that, from 10-Pound Island, it was the dog rose, and the smell of grapes, and the size of the huckleberries. With flake yards, with fish drying in the sun, the air went down to the sea. I think when he says the air went down to the sea, he's talking about the fragrance, which may be a nice way of putting the smell of the fish on the fish racks or fish flakes as they're drying in the sun. I just thought it was a nice poem, kind of more of a lyrical poem than some of the other Maximus poems might be. As indeed the red fish and white fish and blue fish poem that we just heard from John. Remarkably rhyming, sense of rhyming and rhythmical patterning in that poem, which is a little bit unusual for Charles. So this one different in that way, but also very lyric. Well, thanks.
I want to greet Paul and Kathy. Are you here? Yeah, Kathy. Two people from my past. Actually, I have here my first Maximus poems given to me by you, Kathy, on my birthday, 1965. It's been with me, close to me ever since. I want to read two things that mean that I've gone back to over and over again. One is a short Maximus. One is something from Linda Parker, Linda Crane, that for me follows. What I want to read is the opener for volume 5 of the Maxis. A later note on number 15, which if you look into it, it's letter 15 is a later note on letter 2, and this is the way that they go. They're stumbling all over each other in a very, the Maximus poems are stumbling all over each other in a very graceful way. In English, the poetics became meuble, furniture, thereafter, after 1630, and Descartes was the value. Until Whitehead, who cleared out the gunk by getting the universe in as against man alone. And that concept of history, not Herodotus, which was a verb, to find out for yourself, historien, which makes anyone's acts of finding out for him or herself, in other words, restores the traum, that we act somewhere, at least by seizure, that the objective example, Thucydides or the latest, finest tape recorder or any form of record on the spot, live television or what, is a lie, as against what we know went on, the dream. The dream being self-action, with Whitehead's important corollary that no event is not penetrated in intersection or collision with an eternal event. the poetics of such a situation are yet to be found out. I was trying to think of Olson's legacy and thinking about how it speaks to me in my work, and that I go back to all the time because for that exact reason. And secondly, Linda Parker, who changed her name to Linda Crane, was living with Olson during his last years. And I had the privilege of publishing her book, Seabirds, dedicated to Charles. And the opening poem very much seems to me to be working out some of the poetics of the situation that the later note on letter 15 leaves us with, and has left us all with trying to work out those poetics, whether we're poets or not. Linda's short poem is called P's Winding, letter P, P's Winding Sheet. I can't think that P is anyone other than Persephone, but because the glasswort tinges and isn't, because the heron startles and cries in the reeds and oak, and also not a bird is voiceless, because the sunlight and cold, because the blood, because nothing here is not marshland, because this is only marshland, weaving and unweaving, because power is extreme here and not at all, and with no mention of power, because the tide is nearly high in this marshland. We do this simply, do this extremely well, including everything, as if you and I were real and nothing remains behind.
Me has been one of the people, local people who've been coming to the MOL, and she's actually one of our volunteers, is helping us to raise necessary funds for this place. So we're happy that you're here, Mia, and not only helping the GWC to become sustainable, but to dive into the work of Olson. So thank you.
Yeah, it's important work. It's important. So greetings to all. I regretfully came into Olson's work only several years ago, and I happened to discover him when I was doing some research on genealogy and learned that my uncle and great uncle lived at 28 Fort Square, quote, the famous home of the poet. And that sort of launched me into the world of Olson. So I am not a scholar by any means, but I'd like to just share a quick excerpt that was a response to Maximus in Gloucester, Sunday, July 19. And this is my response, or a piece of the response. It is not only the powerful and famous who are damned by God. You, Olson, do not know the power that lives in the soul of the fisherman as you circle them as a gull. From the second floor window at 28 Fort Square, your keen eyes look out toward the harbor in a relentless search for that which will feed the cavernous depth of your soul. The fishermen below your window are silent and slouched over miles of white netting. Their calloused hands weave through the nets so gracefully that one might hear the strings of a violin, a symphony reserved for their own kind. The finest kind is how we call them. But your large hands move through white sheets, scarred by the creation of your pen, to write, to always write, the stories of the men damned by God. Look down and search into the foundation of your home, the structure that holds you, once held the nets, harpoons, and trawl lines for an earlier breed, the fishermen of the dories, powered by wind and muscle, Gloucester's elegant schooners would sail to fishing grounds. Men, lowered into two-man dories, set their trawls, guided only by the light of the moon. At dawn, the schooner returns to the grounds, a sacred ground, in search of the fishermen of the fort. Did you ever hear the widow's wail from your window by the sea? The scream for those damned by God, screams that clash with the clanging sound of the bell buoy, the moan of the lighthouse, the screeches of gulls, the screams for those who enter the dark blanket of fog drifted toward their horizon, the scream for those caught in a violent wave and cast to the bottom of the sea. Charles Olson, this afternoon, there are eyes in this water. The flowers from the shore awakened the sea.
So nice to see several friends and to let this sink in, very rich material sink in. The connection of Ralph Maud and Charles Olson, if anyone's interested and doesn't know about Charles Olson at the harbor, his slapdowns of Tom Clark and Marjorie Perloff are very, very satisfying, and recommend this. And nice to see Sharon, who works so much with Ralph Maud. I'll just read one page of Maximus to Gloucester, letter 2. I love this, especially the first stanza, the first part of it. Tell you, who can tell another how to manage the swimming? He was right. People don't change. They only stand more revealed. I likewise. 1, the light there at the corner because of the big elm and the reflecting houses, winter or summer stays as it was when they lived there. And the house the street cuts off as though it were a fault, besides so sheer. They hid or tried to hide the fact the cargo their ships brought back was black. The library, too, possibly so found it. The point is, the light does go one way toward the post office and quite another way down to Main Street. Nor is that all. Coming from the sea up middle, it is more white, very white, as it passes the gray of the Unitarian Church. But at Pleasant Street, it is abruptly black, hidden city. I'm going to read this number 2, just part of number 2. Or now, when such houses are not built or such trees planted, it's the doctor knows what the parents don't know, or the wife doesn't, of the husband, or the husband of the other. Sins, they still call them, and let pagurocracy thrive. Only the lady has got it straight. She looks as the best of my people look, in one direction, her direction. They know it is elements men stand in the midst of, not these names supported by that false future she, precisely she, has her foot upon.
That line there that Olson wrote about the cargo they brought back was black is still resonates in this town. There's a historian in town who's starting to dig into. She found out about sort of the money that was made off the slave trade in Gloucester from Olson, from reading that Maximus poem. And she's doing a lot of great work in uncovering, going back to original sources to sort of tell that story that hasn't been told before. So
I have sort of bounced around in and out with the Maximus poems, and I wanted to read this one, which I pulled off the Poetry Foundation website, but I've encountered it before. Maximus to himself.
That's a good one.
I've had to learn the simplest things last, which made for difficulties. Even at sea, I was slow to get the hand out or to cross a wet deck. The sea was not, finally, my trade, but even my trade at it, I stood estranged from that which was most familiar, was delayed, and not content with the man's argument that such postponement is now the nature of obedience, that we are all late in a slow time, that we grow up many, and the single is not easily known. It could be, though the sharpness, the antiote, I note in others makes more sense than my own distances. The agilities they show daily, who do the world's business and who do nature's, as I have no sense, I have done either. I have made dialogues, I have discussed ancient texts, have thrown what light I could, offered what pleasure doceit allows. But the known, this I have had to be given, a life, love, and from one man, the world, tokens. But sitting here, I look out as a wind and water man, testing and missing some proof. I know the quarters of the weather, where it comes from, where it goes, but the stem of me, this I took from their welcome or their rejection of me, and my arrogance was neither diminished nor increased by communication. 2, it is undone business I speak of this morning, with the sea stretching out from my feet.
Hello, everyone. What a treat it has been to hear you all and your voices, and to hear Olson through them, and that genius that's always been for me a kind of star inside and out. Anyway, I like this, really like this poem. It's in the big Maximus collected called Civic Disaster, because it includes everything. And I remember that thought of Olson's in Human Universe or somewhere, where he talks about a poem including everything and not just taking some plane of it. And the genius of this is that he does that without the poem just being a hodgepodge or a collection. So it's called Civic Disaster. It's a page long, but I'll read fast. For Ed Bloomberg. There's a peach tree growing. There's a peach tree growing, at least on the fort, though Dutchy, the two dark last old country dressed Sicilian ladies who sat under it and under the grapevine cut their cherry tree down before Dutchy his and his apple finally, because some idea of threat that children's parents would sue. I said, have they? He paid $30. And one morning, the dirty whine of an automatic saw, I thought I was back in the mountains, woke me. The house was in a flap out the window. The apple tree was gone. So I console myself in the last spring, discovering that down on the other side of the hill, where Sam Novello, who now owns the federal fort property proper, throws his rubbish up over the fence by the barking dogs who yell each time the city fire alarm goes off, there is these days this peach tree bravely blooming. Best spring yet, 1963. It was Levasseur nursery he works for and drives their truck cut Dutchy's tree. Bartlett's tree nurses or something like that, $30. And Ed Bloomberg told me weeks later he wanted me to explain to him the poem. And I said, what do you think? And he said, I guess it means never give up hope. Well, his blue eyes shone. One other man I met in Nelson's pharmacy having an ice cream cone has one every afternoon, 2:30, 2 years since his retirement, had him too. And they are not the firing aquamarine eyes of the devil of half lust, which burst like four-footed movement of Nebuchadnezzar's tile of the lion and the bull, was it? He is flanking. I don't know who Ed Bloomberg is, but I think I'd like him if I did know.
Hi everybody. So I wanted to just read a passage from one of Olson's essays that he wrote kind of 1957, 1958, called Notes on Poetics Toward Projective Verse 2. And then this is an essay that I've done a lot of work on over the years. And so this is also a little bit about that sense that of Olson's that he wanted to include everything. And the reason I like these essays is because they show the sort of engagement with Whitehead. And that's always been the thing that's interested me about Olson, is the kind of cosmological side of his poetics. So I'm just going to read a short passage from the Notes on Poetics for Projective Verse 2. The weakness of poems is what they do not include. It is the narrowness of the evidence on which they rest. It is the low-grade inspection of the poet, the failure to get out far enough to recognize the judge, redeemer, or goddess of mischief who arises out of the nature of things. Both belong at the seat of the poem, inspector and judge, if it is to have evidence and play adequately upon the withness of the body, any of our bodies, throw us, shift us, keep us in balance. For this is where we sense it all, and the strains there in that locus, as the poem has been locus. How have you been shaken, taken? The poem rests in its strain locus, and we do in it, if we are able to trust, same. Which means that it has made itself capable of more than, involved as we are, we are. This is its light, its rest is its light, and it comes from 4/5 only the poet has got in, no matter how skillful the poet may be in pitch, in speed, change up, in the manipulation of the two factors, accent and non-accent, old quantity, if the poem does not have a submerged, if bounded quantity jumping from the fish in the sea, it isn't one. The quote is at hand. The reality of the rest and the enduring motion of physical objects, the fish in the poem sea, depends on the spatialization of the occasions, how they wheel, of which it is made up in. And here we are back to the power of the differentials, especially the integral impetus, and what it is catching as it goes through its localisms in the historical routes of those occasions, the salinity of the track of the sea, the import of sauce on the tongue.
The librarian. The landscape, again, Gloucester, the shore one of me is, duplicates, and from which, from offshore, I, Maximus, am removed, observe. In this night, I moved on the territory with combinations, new mixtures of old and known personages. The leader, my father, in an old guise, here selling books and manuscripts. My thought was, as I looked in the window of his shop, there would be materials here for Maximus, when, then, I saw he was the young musician, has been there, been before me, before. It turned out it wasn't a shop, it was a loft, wharf house, in which, as he walked me around a year ago, came back. I had been there before, with my wife and son. I didn't remember. He presented me insinuations via himself and his girl, both of whom I had known for years, but never in Gloucester. I had moved them in to my country. His previous appearance had been in my parents' bedroom, where I found him intimate with my former wife. This boy was now the librarian of Gloucester, Massachusetts. Black space, old fish house, motions of ghosts, I dogging his steps. He, not my father by name himself, with his face twisted at birth, possessed of knowledge, pretentious, giving me what in the instant I knew better of. But the somber place, the flooring, crude, like a wharf's and a barn's space. I was struck by the fact that I was in Gloucester and that my daughter was there, that I would see her. She was over the cut. I hadn't even connected her with my being here, with my being there, that she was here, that she was there in the promised land, the cut. But there was this business of poets, that all my Jews were in the fish house too, and that the librarian had made a party. I was to read. They were. There were many of them slumped around. It was not for me. I was outside. It was the fort. The fort was in East Gloucester, Old Gorton's Wharf, where the library was. It was a region of coal houses, bins. In one, a gang was beating someone to death. In a corner of the labyrinth of fences, I could see their arms and shoulders whacking down, but not the victim. I got out of there, but cops tailed me along the fort beach toward the tavern. The place is still half dark, mud, coal dust. There is no light east of the bridge. Only on the headland toward the harbor from Cressy's have I seen it once, when my daughter ran out on a spit of sand, isn't even there. Where is Bristow? When does 1A get me home? I am caught in Gloucester. What's buried behind Lufkin's diner? Who is Frank Moore?
I want to thank everybody for joining in on this this reading. I think it's been great. It's
Great.
kind of weird that everybody can come together under this technology that keeps us all separated, but then keeps other folks together. It's a strange thing indeed. But thank you all for participating. I hope things will change soon, and when people come to Gloucester, they can come here and sit at Olson's table and go through his books, because it's a wonderful spot we have here looking over City Hall. You can dive inside Olson's brain. So thank you, and everybody have a healthy and safe 2021, and hope to see you at the library. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you.
Good to be with you all. Happy
Great.
New Year.